Hi, and welcome to You Got Moxie, the podcast where we talk about the how of change making. This is Julianne Crommett, your host, and today we are so excited to be joined by Vanessa Roanhorse. Vanessa works in centering Indigenous worldview knowledge and methodologies as part of her consulting work for Roanhorse Consulting. And with us today, she's going to share her personal experiences around financial trauma, the pivotal moments that led her to focus on changing financial systems. And she really emphasizes the importance of starting with what's in front of you and finding that flow in your work. We are so excited to have her here today. Vanessa, it's just wonderful to have you here.
Julie, thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be on the podcast with you.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's get started for our listeners. Can you share a little bit about yourself, your story, and the work you do just to ground us?
Yes. Well, the work I do is trying to center Indigenous worldview knowledge and methodologies into everything we do. I have a consulting firm called Roanhorse Consulting. I started in 2016, and really that work kind of brought me in as first-time entrepreneur, having worked my whole life for other people, and finding myself starting a company focused on building things that don't exist, in particular around capital access, and then really around economic development, and then ultimately around thinking differently about the financial system, the one we live in today, but reminding myself that we had financial systems pre-colonization. Our ancestors had ways of creating capital and wealth that wasn't just money or things, it was language, access to culture and land. And so really the heart of what I'm interested is how do we build things that we want to see for the future today, but at the same time doing it from a place of repair, rematriation, and care.
Amazing. By the way, one of the reasons I love you on multiple levels, and hopefully our listeners now know too, just from that. And so, thinking about our goal as a podcast, right? I always say, instead of how I built this question is, how did I change this? So many people are sitting at home and thinking, gosh, I know something is not right. It's not working. It's not equitable, right? And so the question for you is, can you share that moment for you? What was that pivotal moment when you realized change needed to happen and it struck you that it was in what you just described, that change, especially around financial models, around this financial system that we exist in? Can you start to kind of unpack for us, what was that starting moment for you?
I think for many of us, we all have various financial traumas that start in our childhood. And so, really there's like three moments in my life. The first is when we were about 6 years old, living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with our single parent mother, my twin sister and I, and watching her take us to McDonald's for dinner and her only getting a free cup of coffee. And knowing that those were choices that she was making regularly because we would see us eating and her not eating. So I can remember that. And then I can remember in high school, because I went to an all-girls boarding school on the East Coast called Miss Porter's. So if you know, you know.
Oh, and I know other Miss Porter's grads. And speaking of which, some amazing people. Just
incredible people. But also what a wild school to go to from the reservation and then suddenly I'm in Connecticut. And it was also there that I realized that I was financially poor. I knew that I didn't have the same things, but I never felt poor back home because I had family, I had food, I had drinks, I had fun. There was always something there. But it wasn't until I went to boarding school that I realized, oh, I am dirt poor, like financially dirt poor. But it was also there that I actually learned how, even in the clothes I was wearing and the limited resources that I had, to talk to people with money and be bold and unapologetic. I learned how to code switch around things like that, but I also learned how to small talk, and I think self-deprecation came in at that point in my life, personal jokes to ease the situation. The last one is when I started this company And the first year of starting the company, we were highly successful. And as I was moving into the next year, I wanted to hire an employee. And we had almost all of the contracts already in hand. So we were in the black by like February for the whole year.
Wow.
And I went into a bank to get a small line of credit so I could hire somebody. And they wouldn't even take my meeting. They wouldn't even consider meeting with me. And, just hitting that wall was just really a moment where all of these things kind of came together. And my first thought was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Like I saw how my mom had to make these choices. I saw how I had to like make myself smaller in order to talk to people with money. And then I saw myself as a relatively successful entrepreneur still being denied. So like no matter what I did, the systems weren't there for me and they weren't going to be there for me. So that's really 3 moments that I think grounded me in the work today that I do and why we're just unapologetic.
Amazing. First of all, thank you for sharing all of that. And also at the different stages of your life, because I'm going to assume some of our listeners have also had moments at different phases that have compounded right into a vision of, oh, wait a second, this deeply has to change, right?
Right.
And side note, I really related to your McDonald's story as a child personally.
Really? Yeah.
My 3rd birthday party was at McDonald's. So I have a deep, for anybody from McDonald's listening, here we are. And from the choices that your mom made financially for you all. So just to recognize and honor that in multiple ways. So, I'm thinking about our audience and maybe even sharing some relation to your own story and that feeling of, God, this seems so big. It's a whole system, right? What can I do? Like, where do I start, right? That feeling of where do I start to directionalize my energy so that I can actually feel like I'm pushing in a way that makes sense, whether it be for me, where I'm sitting, et cetera. And that sometimes that large feeling of this system, like you were saying, the experience of the bank, and then suddenly realize, oh my God, it's the whole thing. Where did you go from there? So meaning, how did you make that decision of where you would start to focus your energy? And what did that look like? Especially thinking about our listeners who might be feeling overwhelmed, like there's too many problems to solve. There's so many things that are unfair, even within looking at one sector. How did you begin, essentially? How did you make that decision?
I mean, probably like most of us, sometimes decisions are made a little bit for you because you are working with what's in front of you. Like whatever the thing is in front of you, right? So like for me, I needed $25,000 line of credit. I got denied a $25,000 line of credit. So the solution was like, all right, so I'm building this program for the city of Albuquerque, and in it, I'm developing a strange loan program, a forgivable loan program for these entrepreneurs. So I went from that conversation to one of our local credit union partners and just said, hey, have you ever done anything that could be related to character-based or relationship-based lending? Have you ever worked on not using the 5 C's of credit, particularly collateral, which is one of the biggest barriers for most of us? Because, if you don't come from generational wealth and you don't have assets that are considered valuable by the financial system, you might as well have financial credit invisibility. And it's another form of racial, gender injustices that are employed in so many ways that is accepted by society, and yet when you look at it, you're like, this should be illegal. So I think like to the big question is like how and where do you even start to tackle this? I don't think I had a vision for what this was going to look like, but what I did have was what was in front of me, and I did have the questions that I wanted answered, and I was able to articulate it enough that when I talked to this credit union, they were like, what do you mean? Because we wanted to start an initiative that was based on relationship-based lending. And I will say it was a powerful moment to identify that, find it, and then to essentially, one of my biggest projects is build out an initiative that has moved close to $3 million across the states here in New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Utah, Colorado, to Native American entrepreneurs and undocumented and immigrant families, where we didn't use any of the 5 C's of credit. And we have a 99% payback rate. And what I can say is the model we created will hopefully go national later this year. But it's not because I was trying to change the system. I started from a place of like lived experience, empathy, and then curiosity, and a little bit of just, I won't take no for an answer. And that trajectory has led us to where we are today. But so much of this work, from my point of view around changing systems, is that if you're working so hard and every step of the way feels painful and it's harming you, stop. Like, find the flow, because we are individuals here for a short period of time. And I really encourage people not to like try to change the system as a result of their bodies, their mental health, and their well-being. So that's like the biggest thing I've learned is like, if this is so hard, it's hurting me, then I have to find another way.
That's exactly right. If you could say that again for the people in the back, that was spot. And I think something that you said that was really profound for us to hear is this idea of, you didn't set out really thinking about, I'm going to change the whole system. You said, I'm going to do what's right in front of me, what is happening right here, right now. And also this idea of, if it still feels like a boulder day after day, right? Is that actually the right use of your highest and best, right? Because that's not being
Exactly.
highest and best, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something my coach said, you're making me think about another conversation, and it ties right into our theme of You Got Moxie. It's funny because basically what you were talking about is gumption or moxie, is that extra, a little oomph that it took, a little bit of moxie that it took, right? And you were harnessing your own genius, right? And part of what I think we don't think about enough, I think especially in change-making work, is that we can be highly competent in different areas, but it's not necessarily our zones of genius. And
Right.
my coach pointed this out, and this was an unlocking thing. And it's basically what you just spoke to, right? Flow is when you're in your zone of genius, not in your zone of excellence.
That's right.
Right. And sometimes when you're in the zone of excellence, that's where the boulder feeling is happening, right? Because you might be good at it, but it's draining. It's draining. Yeah. The 99% payback rate, everybody, that data point, and then that you're going national with it. So now we're talking about scale. Thinking about that, this starts to feel like a project, if I'm hearing you, where you use your specific genius. But as you do that, even when you're in flow, you can face challenges, right? Or sometimes roadblocks that you didn't expect. Can you talk about maybe a moment, even in this state of flow and genius that you're operating in, where you hit that roadblock, especially as you're thinking of scaling, right? Yeah. And how did you think about that? How did you overcome it? Did you? Like what, share a little bit about that.
Sure. So the scale on this program is like, one, we can help other credit unions do this. Easy peasy, the design of it is really replicable. But the bigger scale we did was we supported Indigenous-led and communities of color-led organizations to get about a 3 to 4 year runway to decide if they want to become investors, funders, lenders, CDFIs themselves. And as a result of that, 3 of them have launched their own funds, ranging anywhere between $1 million to $10 million. And so that's the kind of like shifting capital to shift power that I'm after. Sounds really good. The reality, though, that I learned through this process in trying to one, just put money into the hands of Indigenous women. That's all. That is like one of my life goals. Just give them the money. They will do the right things with it. Is that when you're moving so fast, how you bring people along matters, and ensuring people understand the language, the why, and the how matters. And so I've hit a roadblock with that, which is in some ways the communities themselves are confused because it's moving so quickly. Like when you hit the flow, it's fast, and that is not how people work, and that is not how communities work. That's not how trust works. That's not how relationships work. At the height of so much of this, we had so much money coming in, but the reality was like, how do you translate something like that when capitalism itself tells you when money comes, this is how you're supposed to operate? Versus what we were trying to do is live in an abundance mindset and framework. But to have that means you've had time to heal and to address your traumas and to feel like you can be curious and have psychological safety when you disagree. And like creating these opportunities have been amazing, but figuring out quickly that like if we're not also supporting the communities to identify what it is they need to stay caught along, we can move too fast. And ultimately that can be harmful. The other I would say is I learned it's okay for folks not to be ready for this. And it's also okay for those who are ready to run with it. And so that has been another learning lesson for me, which is as much as I wanted to bring everyone along with me, I wasn't doing a service to everyone by assuming that this is what and how folks were ready for it. And when we talk about money, the trauma of money is hundreds of years in the making. So that's like, for me, a big one, a really big one.
It's a huge lesson. It's an incredible insight for folks because I think that feels so real and translatable across sectors, across communities, across goals, right? This idea of accepting where people are in their own journey and that is okay. And then what does that mean for you to keep going? I think is just hitting it right on. And I think another part of that I asked to you, just because as part of this podcast, I also want people to know, what does great partnership look like when you're making change? Part of You Got Moxie is we're going to be talking to folks across sectors on purpose because we are not sharing wisdom across sectors. And so folks are doing their work, right, in each of their different sectors, but that communal knowledge, that communal wisdom is not coming together in the ways that it possibly could and could be unlocking, right, in that abundance mindset. So when you think about in the work you're doing and what you've seen and these insights around, where folks are in their journey, what does great partnership and coalition building look like to you as people are thinking about how can I bring others along and how can I adopt that mindset that you just outlined?
I mean, I think a couple of things, Catherine Finney of the Genius Guild recently shared something where she's like, it took me 20 years to build Genius Guild because it took 20 years of relationship building to then be ready to finally do the thing that was going to be the change. And I jokingly said in my random things is it took 10 years to be an overnight success, and like these are just kind of thoughts around time, because I feel like when we talk about partnership, there's a very sort of surface level sense of what partnership is. And it's usually a short period of time to achieve goal A, B, and C. KPIs happen, and everyone is successful. And I think that has traditionally been the way partnerships have been discussed. But if I'm interested in this work, I'm actually not seeking partnerships, I'm seeking relationships. And a relationship could be a partnership at some point, but a relationship is one built on trust and transparency and courage. It's built on patience, and it's built on showing up for each other when needed. And I think in a lot of ways, when we do a lot of our capital design work, we will draft, in sometimes our investment policy statements, or we will draft in MOUs and agreements that we're doing with organizations, which is our definition of right relationship. And part of that is because as Indigenous people, and when we're working with other non-Indigenous organizations, particularly people with money, we have to be very clear what our boundaries are. So I would say partnerships and relationships also require clear boundaries, clear non-negotiables that are agreed upon. And again, if it's a healthy one, that's when you have the kind of liberation to do radical things. And it takes time. I would say my biggest thing is it takes time. And if you nurture it, when it's ready, everything moves fast. It moves quickly, and no one has to explain anything because nobody needs the one-on-one anymore. They're just exactly in step by step by step. So it's not an easy conversation to have because it's like I said, it's primarily it has historically been a transactional concept.
That's exactly right. But I love that you pivoted to the relationship piece, Vanessa, especially I love this idea of the sort of agreements or making the implicit explicit, even within your actual MOUs or the actual documentation. I think that's so tangible for folks. And I love this concept of time because I think everybody feels urgency and things are urgent, but they also require time.
Yes.
And that tension is real, right?
Yeah.
And that slowing down to speed up that you kind of talked about, right? This idea that if you build it right over time. And so, in thinking about, kind of parting thoughts for our folks is how do you balance that tension of the urgency and the necessity of time, and what keeps you going?
So I am a person who lives in the future. And so what has helped me truthfully is, besides my partner and my son, one is like reminding myself that the things I make today have been made before in the past. I'm not innovating. I'm not creating new things. What I'm doing is I'm pulling back from deep memories to create something today, something for the future, right? So that will slow me down, and it reminds me how long time is. It also reminds me that like these things are cyclical, right? Like these ideas, these concepts, these movements, they have happened before for a reason. So that's a huge one, is holding on to the point in time in which I get to contribute to this, and that what I'm doing, I will never live to see the fruition of the seeds I planted, but my son will, I hope, as maybe one day his future children will. And then I think the other that reminds me to slow down, and not to slow down to just to not just be present, but to slow down in the sense that like there are so many people creating important things. And when you slow down, you talked earlier about this need for sectors and the need for things to come together. When we slow down, we start to see those connections, and we start to see the common places we're playing in. And then ultimately, if you pulled everything back, the majority, we're all in agreement around the purpose of all of this work. And so slowing down reminds you you're part of like an ecosystem. You're part of this whole fabric. And I think those are really just important to remind yourself is we're not the first to have ever done this. We won't be the last. There's a lot of learnings from our ancestors, and that at the end of the day, it's not about winning or making it happen. It's about being part of the continuum and making peace with that. And then I guess just looking around and admiring what's happening next door.
That's amazing. Vanessa, by the way, I now realize another level as to why we are friends.
I'm so glad. I feel the same.
Absolutely. I mean, it just hit into my spirit, into my soul, what you just said, because this is the reality, right? I talk about it a lot as a quilt, and we contribute our square, but that there's this other big piece that we're part of.
Yeah.
And our job is actually not to, quote unquote, solve it all, right?
Nope.
It's, as you said, to be part of a continuum with the hope that maybe the people who come after us keep picking up the ball,
Yep.
so to speak, in my sports analogy version, and keep running it or moving it or shaping it. And we've never talked about that explicitly, but here we are in our friendship. So I just can't say enough, Vanessa, to thank you for sharing your insights with us today, how you use your moxie, how you think about change making and community and relationships. And thank you for all the work you do on a daily basis. If you don't hear it enough, you're hearing it from us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope that we can have you back in the future to keep talking about the great work you're doing.
I'm in every time. I'm in.
Thanks again for joining us for You Got Moxie. Continue to follow us and listen to your favorite episodes at collectivemoxie.com. That's collectivemoxie.com. We're excited to see you next time. Take care.